Hey guys, I've translocated to my office to do this last video for you. This is going to be a quick one, I think, and I really want to use it almost to punctuate the sort of things we've been doing in the last two videos. So, the way I really see the last two videos is kind of like this. Once you start to get a feel for peerScholar and for your feature set, the options that you can toggle around and play with, especially within the case study approach, but generally, things like whether someone can proceed to a next section if they haven't done the first one, whether you're having anonymity on or off, all these kinds of things, that, as you get thinking about these things, you realize you can actually make the platform, do some really cool things. And so I've been trying to highlight a few of those as we've gone through this part, and I want to kind of finish with this one, which we're going to call the mentor approach. But this is by no means meant to be sort of an exhaustive set. There are other, interesting pedagogical models. Also, actually, before I get into the mentor one, let me say that, as we think about these exotic approaches, and as it becomes obvious that people like to use them, these will eventually become dedicated pedagogical modules. You'll be able to just go into a module that assumes you have a certain thing in mind and that asks you, the appropriate questions for that and only that. So right now we are kind of, especially using the case study module, to kind of mess with things. But in a way that really requires you to kind of think along very carefully. And so with the pedagogical modules, we'll have done the thinking for you and make sure you sort of can't mess stuff up. Right now, you still can. Get in there while you can and mess stuff up. All right, so the mentor approach, what do I mean by this? Well, I mean, it's really the kind of thing we've heard before, in a sense, where I'm going to talk about mentees and mentors. So usually mentees are somebody that's more junior in a program or some learning endeavor, and mentors usually have been part of that learning endeavor for a while, and so the mentors have experience and knowledge, and therefore are in a position to give good feedback to mentees. So unlike the usual situation where we just have students giving feedback to each other and they're all kind of on an equal plane, here we're going to imagine a potentially more informed group giving feedback to a potentially less informed group. And before I even jump into peerScholar, I'm not even sure we have to, but I probably will. But just so you have the sense, if you imagine the classic approach, in the classic approach, let's say we had 100 students, all 100 submitted, all 100 assessed, all 100 reflected. What we can do now is imagine that instead as two groups of 50 mentees and 50 mentors. For all of those, we're going to tell them, yes, you can go to the next step even if you haven't done the previous. So we're going to toggle those on for both the assess and the reflect. And then what we're going to do is just do the following. We will tell the mentees to submit in the create phase, not the mentors. So only the mentees, only those 50, let's say, submit in the create phase. Then when we go to the assess phase, we say everybody can go ahead. So even those 50 that didn't submit. And in fact, once we get here, it's those 50, the mentors, that we say, okay, now you spring into action. Mentees don't even log into this phase. So the mentees do not even log in. The mentors log in, and let's say we ask them to assess 4 peers each. So those 50 will assess, 4 of the mentees. And ultimately then there will be like 200 mentee assessments, which means each mentee will ultimately get 4 assessments as well. And now once again, it's the mentees that will log in to reflect, and not the mentors. So when the mentees log in, they will see the feedback their mentors have given them, and I would recommend that they be asked to assess that feedback again, because that's your opportunity to get them thinking in certain ways, practice that certain thought, which they repeat for peer 1, peer 2, peer 3, peer 4. And you could ask them to revise. In fact, another thing you could do with this model is you could have the mentors be the people who grade the final products that these people produce. So if you had TAs, for example, let's change this around a little bit and think of it the following way. You could even have let's say you have a 20 student class and you have 2 TAs. Well, you could tell those 20 students to submit something. You could then tell the TAs that they have to assess, maybe 20 peers each, literally, if you wanted. Then each of the students would get 2 assessments, right? One from each TA. So you could have the TAs now going in and giving assessments to, say, some draft product, and then the students come back in, they see the comments that the TAs have given them, the feedback, they may be asked to assess it, and they may be asked to revise. And so then they ultimately submit something, and then it could be the TAs again that come back and grade what they see at the end. So now these TAs have been part of the whole process. They actually had given that formative feedback in the first place, and now they're there to assess on the other end. So just to very quickly, there's not a whole lot I think I have to show you in peerScholar, but let's say we did the classic activity, and we say the mentor model. So literally, as we go through this, everything will be like a typical classic activity, except for the following things. We will have to, in the assess phase, not require completion of the create. And similarly with the reflect, we want to not require completion of the assess. So, this first one means that the TAs will be able to assess even though they didn't create. And then the next one means that the students, the mentees, will be able to see the feedback even though they didn't assess, right? And so that allows each of these guys to have separate tasks. Aside from that setting idea, then really it's just about managing the students. So in this case, if we stick with the TA one, you should be a student in this class, and please do the following. And so you give them, their instructions for what they want to do. But now when you're getting to the assess phase, here you might want to say, you should be one of the TAs. One of the TAs for this class. If you're not, please log out. You do not have to do this step. Something like that. Just being clear with students that, hey, this assess phase isn't for them. And so instead, we're thinking of the mentors or the TAs, and we're saying how many students' work do we want them to assess, and what do we want them to assess? What are the questions we want them to ask, etc. And everything just kind of flows from there. Again, just keep in mind with the reflect here, you'd probably change the instructions. You'd say, you will see the feedback given to you by your TA or your TAs, maybe both TAs, who knows, and then do the following things, and you decide what you want them to do. That's all there is to it. Okay. So just kind of notice how these very simple features, letting them go forward without doing the previous one, in the case study deciding who is assessing who, that with a number of these features and a good understanding of what peerScholar is doing, you can bend it to do all sorts of different things, including this sort of mentor-mentee model, which is a very powerful approach in a lot of contexts. Alrighty? Cool. So I'm going to leave it there, leave it to your imagination. If you think of, or if a faculty member should come to you with an exotic case other than the ones we've covered, and we've covered quite a few, but please reach out. Let's put our heads together, see if we can think it through, see if peerScholar currently can bring to life what they want, and if not, then we'll imagine, how difficult would it be to alter peerScholar in a way that it can. More and more, I'm starting to believe that there's not a lot it can't fit, and so it's fun to think through these use cases and see if we can come up with a case. And if we can, then I'll probably produce a video like this, at least until such a time as we produce a dedicated module for that pedagogical approach. Whew. All right, so this is the new end of the course, at least for now. Thank you very much. I hope you found these useful, and please, as always, feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Alrighty, Steve saying later. Bye-bye.